My name is James Rucker. I'm a consultant psychiatrist and a NIHR clinician scientist. The NIHR is a UK government-funded research body. I have a fellowship from them to research the potential therapeutic benefits of psilocybin. So I lead a research team at King's College London called the Psychedelic Trials Group, and we undertake trials with psilocybin similar to the trial that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine yesterday.
That's brilliant, thank you. And so just talk me through some of those findings in the report that's been released.
Yeah, so this was a single centre trial. So it was just one research team recruiting participants. It was a trial that was investigating whether psilocybin, which is the active component of magic mushrooms, potentially an antidepressant, it was investigating whether it was similar or superior in effect to escitalopram. Escitalopram is a commonly available, commonly prescribed antidepressant used all over the UK and around the world. So the team were interested to know whether psilocybin outperformed escitalopram or not. So they devised a study in which they randomized 59 people, I think it was. They meant to recruit 60, but I think 59 people were randomized. So either one of two groups. One received 2 dosing sessions with a very low dose of psilocybin, and then subsequently pills containing escitalopram, although they couldn't tell what was in the pills because they looked the same. And then the other group received 2 doses of psilocybin 3 weeks apart. And they also received pills to take in between, but those were placebo pills. And everyone who was in that trial got quite extensive psychological support, which is important because that psychological support probably had quite a profound effect on the outcome. And then they measured self-reported measures of depression. So they asked the patients to tell them in a valid way how depressed they felt, what their symptoms were, and then they compared the scores from that depression scale between the 2 groups. And at 6 weeks, their primary outcome, which was the change in this depression measure, didn't statistically significantly differ between those 2 groups. There are lots of caveats to that, though, which we can maybe discuss.
That's brilliant, thank you. And so I think that, there's a bit of this stigma almost, isn't there, around magic mushrooms. It's a psychedelic drug and that kind of thing. Of course, this is just a compound of that. So can you just talk to me a little bit about this stigma and how maybe we should think otherwise towards this drug?
My view of drugs in general is that they are tools, molecular tools. It's just like a tool in your toolbox, really. You need to learn what it's good for and what it's not good for. We should probably have that general attitude towards drugs. Obviously, some drugs are very harmful, but some drugs have a use. And it may be that psilocybin has a use. However, it was swept up in the war on drugs, really, in the sort of 60s and 70s. And it was rather arbitrarily put into Schedule 1 of the 1971 Misuse of Drugs Act in the UK and various other replications of the UN conventions on drugs. And that meant that brought a legal guillotine down. It meant that doctors could not prescribe it after that, whereas before they were using it as a treatment. They were using LSD as a treatment as well. It was relatively commonly used in psychiatry prior to that time. But as I say, both those drugs, psychedelics in general, swept up in war on drugs. Post 1970, no activity, no clinical use of them, despite the fact they did have a clinical use. We've written about that. I've written about that quite extensively. And we entered a sort of dark ages after that. There was no medical use, and the research just dropped off because you had to have a special license in order to use the drug. The Home Office wouldn't give out those licenses. No grant funder would give you any money to do research with those drugs. And this sort of opprobrium, this stigma developed. If it's been legally determined to be bad, it must be bad. And that's what we're living with today. But and there are complex reasons for why this is happening. We're starting to reinvestigate them again, partly because we're slightly run out of ideas when it comes to treatment of depression, and we're looking for history for inspiration. That's partly why ketamine has been developed as an antidepressant, and it seems to work very well. But actually, that was a drug from the 60s, developed as an alternative to something called phencyclidine, but developed as an anesthetic. But actually, in low doses, for various very interesting reasons, it also has quite a significant and rapid antidepressant effect. And what's interesting about psilocybin is that it seems also to have that rapid antidepressant effect. One of the big problems with currently available antidepressants is they take weeks to work. Often 2 weeks, but often more like 6 weeks. And during that time, you've got someone who often feels very desperate, very unwell, very anxious, often suicidal, and that can be difficult to manage. So this is all about improving treatments for patients. And it's here that psilocybin may have a use, and this paper contributes to the body of knowledge that informs on that.
Yeah, because I know that antidepressant, I mean, I know there's a lot of different types of antidepressant tablets, and sometimes it can take people a long time to kind of adjust and find the right one for them, and it can have all sorts of adverse effects. So with psilocybin, is this something which could be kind of a one size fits all, or is it also a matter of it may suit some people and it may not suit other people?
Yeah, there's no one size fits all, particularly when it comes to something as complicated as a human body. And I think we need to remember that the brain is possibly the most complicated thing in the known universe, and the amount we know about it is tiny compared to the sort of mystery that's going on inside there. So there's no one size fits all, and prescribing in psychiatry is educated guesswork, and will remain so for the foreseeable future, I think. So I think what this is about is having different strings to our bow, or different tools in our toolbox about how we approach problems like depression. So antidepressants will suit some people, but we know that there are a lot of people that antidepressants do not suit. They don't work, they get horrible side effects, they can leave them feeling worse. Psilocybin works in a different way, ketamine works in a different way. And for those people who traditional antidepressants don't work for, who've also failed talking therapies, it may be that ketamine and psilocybin are a more suitable treatment for. So as I say, it's about having different tools in your toolbox and being able to use them.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of goes on to my other question as well. Many people may argue that antidepressants, any kind of an unnaturally found chemical going into the body is wrong, and that they should be doing therapy and that kind of thing. For people who may believe that, is psilocybin more of a natural thing that could potentially help with that, so they're not maybe ingesting a chemical? And yeah, how does that balance kind of work?
Look, psilocybin is a chemical. Escitalopram is a chemical. They're all chemicals. We're made up of chemicals. I think that the narrative of where treatments come from is important. Narratives are very important in mental health in general, because depending on how we've been brought up, depending on our pre-existing belief structures about different treatments, we will prefer different sorts of treatment, and that's fine. But we need to have access to those treatments so that we can work with different people's belief structures. So psilocybin is natural in that sense. It's been produced by certain species of mushrooms since time immemorial. And I think that is, in a certain sense, for some people reassuring, because you can see how the body has evolved with the mushroom, as it were. And some people find that reassuring. It makes no difference from a drug regulatory point of view. We want to avoid scenarios like happened with thalidomide in the 50s and 60s. So that's why there is a very, very tightly regulated, well-determined process of determining whether a new treatment is safe and effective and should be used in the general population. And that's what we're going through with psilocybin. We should not short circuit that process by assuming safety just on the basis that this is something that is contained naturally in the environment, because there are things naturally in the environment that will kill you very quickly. So sure, it's slightly different with psilocybin. People have been using it for a long time, so we're pretty sure actually that it's not going to be killing people, but we have not gone through that whole process of determining in a clinical trial, scientific, internationally agreed process of determining whether the drug is safe and effective. In this study, again, it's a piece of that jigsaw, it's a part of that process. We've still got quite a way to go.
That's great, thank you. Just a couple more questions. Just going forwards with this then, because I know that there are some people I've heard of that already kind of taking this as an antidepressant, and I'm not sure if I'm correct in thinking this, but can it also be used to help with addictions? That's one question. And then just with going forwards, what's the kind of situation of people getting hold of this now, and going forward, how are you hoping that it may be kind of regulated and made into a drug later?
Yeah, so let's talk about addictions. Probably the best evidence for psychedelics prior to the 1971 sort of legal cutoff was in alcoholism. And LSD was used as an adjunct in people with treatment-resistant forms of alcoholism. And a meta-analysis was done, published 5, maybe 10 years ago, that favoured LSD over placebo very strongly when it came to alcoholism. So actually, although we're testing psilocybin for depression, some of the best evidence for use of psychedelics is in alcoholism. And thus you could reasonably hypothesize that addictions in general may be a tractable target to investigate, again, with psychedelics. There's various problems with that, though. People with addictions are harder to recruit into clinical trials and harder to keep in clinical trials. And I think in terms of the sort of drug development process, many people came to the conclusion, at the start of it, that depression was probably the thing to go for, because there was also evidence from the 60s that psychedelics were helpful in depression, and depression's such a big problem. There's so many people suffer from it. Not saying that addiction is not also a big problem, they're both big problems, but we had to make a choice about what to focus on. In terms of availability, so one of the big changes that's happened over the past few years is that there are companies or institutes manufacturing psilocybin. They're manufacturing it to the same quality and purity of any medicine. And they're doing that under Schedule 1 restrictions. And that's hugely expensive and very technically difficult to do, but they are doing it. And that change has occurred in the past 5 years. So that the reason why that changes everything from a drug development point of view is that you can do placebo-controlled trials. So you can ask the manufacturer to manufacture a psilocybin capsule, but you could also ask them to manufacture a capsule which doesn't have psilocybin, and you can't tell by looking at those two capsules what's in it. Of course, you can often tell when you take it, but that's a different matter. And the point is that you can do these drug development trials that regulators need in order to license the therapy. And without the license, I can't prescribe it as a normal jobbing doctor. So this process of clinical trials and this process of manufacturing the drug to a specific purity is required in order to get to a process where this treatment can be more generally available to the public. So we're not there yet. We're halfway through this drug development process, basically. But it takes years. If you look at ketamine, the first trials investigating it as an antidepressant were in the late 90s. It's only very recently been released as an antidepressant. Psilocybin, I think, actually will be quicker than that. It's not available at the moment on the NHS. It's not available privately. It's only available via a clinical trial.
I'm just wondering if this speaks more generally to this kind of legalizing of certain substances.
I think it points to a shifting in attitudes. I'm not sure whether legalizing is quite the right word, and I know that the UK government does not want to deviate from what I think is a poorly informed choice of criminalizing end users. I think, but what we are seeing, I think, is a shift in attitudes, and the reasons for that are complex. As I've already intimated, people have been looking to history for inspiration in terms of treating mental health problems. But I think there's this just sort of emerging narrative that the drug war hasn't worked. And what were the consequences of that decision to escalate it? Taken by successive US governments and then mimicked by other governments all over the world. And we still see that today, see in the Philippines and etc. Really unbelievably harsh policies towards people who use drugs. And yet, as I say, drugs are tools. What's important is to be able to scientifically know what they're good for and what they're bad for. You can't do that if you've got a societal and political attitude which introduces a stigma before you even start. It makes it very, very difficult to do. So I think there's a general shift in attitudes, and I think that's welcome because I think it fosters scientific knowledge about drugs rather than rhetoric. The drug is bad because we say it's bad, but why? Why is it bad? What is it about it that's bad? Could it be good? These are important questions, and I think it is good that we are emerging from a sort of dark age of prohibition. There are some drugs that need to be very tightly controlled and very tightly regulated because they are dangerous. There are some drugs that are very tightly controlled and are not as dangerous as that. And I think if we can inform on a process where we can scientifically understand a drug's relative pros and cons, that will be better for society in the long run.
Thank you. Just the final question. I'm just wondering if there are any kind of side effects to psilocybin, and with that, would there be any possibility of people taking it too far? What kind of regulation is needed?
We never give people psilocybin to take home. We only ever deliver it in the hospital. You have your single dose experience. By the end of the day, you're pretty much back to where you were at the start of the day, and you go home. You don't get given any psilocybin to take home, so there's no possibility of you overdosing or doing anything else with it. Psilocybin is remarkably safe when it comes to toxicity to the body. It's actually much safer than many of the drugs that I would commonly prescribe in psychiatry anyway, in terms of overdose potential. So we're not worried about that at all. Totally hear the concerns about the opioid epidemic. Opioids are dangerous in overdose. With psilocybin, if you overdose on it, you're going to have a hell of a ride, and bad things can happen when you are in that state, particularly if you're not in a contained environment. But your body itself is unlikely to be at significant risk. So you asked me before about the possibility of treating psychedelics for addiction, and yeah, they may well be a treatment for an addiction. In fact, they may have anti-addictive properties, but not even the regulatory authorities, the Home Office in the UK, the DEA in the US, they don't contend that these drugs are addictive, and there just is no evidence that they are addictive. So that element of it doesn't concern me. It does concern me that people use psychedelics recreationally when they're not well informed about their effects. If you take a psychedelic drug, and in the doses that we are investigating it for depression, you do trip. You have changes in your visual misperception. They're not really hallucinations, it's more just distortions in what you're seeing. You can experience a wide variety of emotions. You can experience mystical experiences, all sorts of other strange experiences that seem to come along with the therapeutic effect. But the point is that when we do this in a clinical trial, that's contained within the hospital. You have a doctor there, you have therapists there that you've got to know. You're in a safe and supportive environment, and that is absolutely key to these treatments, is that you feel safe to explore your mind, to understand where your depression might be coming from, and that you trust the people that you're with. The same is true in recreational use. So that's the way we are thinking about psilocybin, and that marks it apart from something like escitalopram, where you go to your GP and they give you an outpatient prescription and you take that drug on a daily basis. Of course, that's not acceptable to some people. They get side effects, etc. They don't like the idea of having to take something every day. Psilocybin for them may suit them or appeal to them better because it's almost like the experience is teaching you something about yourself that you can then take away from the clinic into the real world. A sort of self-education, if you like, a toolbox of how to manage difficult experiences, difficult emotions, difficult relationships with others. So something that feels, in that sense, a bit more empowering than popping a pill every day.
So it wouldn't be something which is, here's 10 pills for your 10 days or that kind of thing. It would be, you come into the place, you have that experience, and you then go away. And so for people who might need that on a regular basis, would that mean that they would then need to kind of go into somewhere every day, or how would it work?
No, I mean, I think that's still an open question. You certainly wouldn't be requiring people to come in every day. And I think if we did do repeated doses of psilocybin, I can't see it being at a frequency more than every 3 months, say. And in between that time, and I think this is key to understand, and it reflects elements of that trial that we're discussing, in between times you have ongoing psychological therapy, talk therapy, or other forms of therapy. There are so many other things that are good for depression: exercise, diet, social connections, so many other things. So it's part of a more sort of holistic package of how do you empower someone to change their life so that their mood improves, so that they feel more connected and more involved in their life. So we wouldn't never be giving psilocybin very regularly. That wouldn't work for various reasons. You become, the effects of the drug would wear off. It wouldn't make any sort of pharmacological sense. But there could be a case for repeated dosings, but as I say, probably every 3 months as a minimum. That's all very open questions, though. I'm not going on clinical trial evidence there. I'm going on how it used to be used prior to 1970. And that was most usually in the context of ongoing psychotherapy, and then with intermittent uses of psychedelics to help people get through elements where they were getting stuck.
That's brilliant, thank you. That's pretty much all the questions that I've got. Is there anything else that you feel I've missed or that you want to add?
It's just important to contextualize this trial in an overall drug development process. And that process takes many years, and it's very exhaustive. And it's the same process that brought us the COVID vaccine. And it was obviously very accelerated for COVID, but for most new treatments, it takes many years, and it is something we can rely on. It is something that engenders the trust of whole societies, or most of whole societies. So I'm mindful of not jumping the gun with psychedelics. They may be a new treatment, but for various reasons they may not be. We should not short circuit that process. We should let the evidence speak for itself about what this tool is good for and what it's not good for. And based on that evidence, we can think sensibly about how to use it.